Good afternoon, Suidlanders. How are you? Today is Friday, the 31st of March, 2023, and this is Suidlanders Week in Review. What a week. At the risk of exaggerating, I'm very confident that we can safely say that this has been the most dramatic week in our lives, and one of the most dramatic weeks in the history of the world. Of course, the times of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, and I suppose the collapse of the Eastern Front in World War II, and the beginning of the Great Depression, Black Thursday, and other weeks have been incredibly spectacular, incredibly harmful, and perhaps they exceed this week. But this week's events allow this week to lay claim, perhaps not to the highest spot on the list of unbelievable weeks, but a high spot anyway. Without further ado, I'm going to take you through the salient events from last Saturday, since our last week in review last Friday, to today. One hardly knows where to begin on this list because I've got lots and lots of articles. Sim Chabalala, the Standard Bank CEO, endorsed central bank digital currencies. I'm going to be brief with most of these articles because there are just too many dramatic things to go through, and some of them must be discussed properly. PayShap, a 100% digital payment system, has been launched in South Africa. In fact, it was launched a few weeks, perhaps even a month ago, but now it's become like almost a formality with a chop on it. All of the major banks in South Africa have already signed up to it, and smaller banks are busy joining it. It may well become the base or the platform for CBDCs in South Africa. We've had calls from the ANC for the Constitution to be amended. The Constitution that they wanted and that they got I beg your pardon, that's Judith the Malinois. Come say hello. Is now apparently not in order. Yeah, there, look at those people. Look. Mungu? She's beautiful, huh? Handful, but quite beautiful, I must say. I didn't select her myself. She was selected for me by somebody who has many dogs and has had thousands over years. He told me that he believed that she was an exceptional specimen of Malinois. So he bought her for me and gave her to me as a gift. I'm lucky, huh? Okay. They want now, at the 25th anniversary of the Constitution, remember that the Constitution didn't come out of the 90 to 93 process, if you like. It wasn't in place in 1994. The Constitution, unless I'm very much mistaken, was implemented in 1996, 97, maybe 98, roughly in that region. And so the ANC is now saying that it doesn't work well enough for the majority of the people. And you have to ask yourself, how much more should it work for the majority of the people? In what way does it work for the non-majority? This is what you wanted. This is what you've got. Now you say it was never good enough because it doesn't look after your voters well enough, that you are polling at 37%. Did you see that? I didn't make a video about it. About 8 weeks ago, a poll revealed that the African National Congress's support is now at 37%, which, as I've said to people, is not a good thing. It is a very, very bad thing, because it will lead to the African National Congress being what the African National Congress is. It will lead to them taking drastic, illegal steps to shore up their power. Not illegal, but equally menacing is the prospect of them going into a coalition with the economic freedom fighters. And that is not good. It would be better if the ANC support was hovering around 50 to 55%. We don't need any more stability, any more instability in our state and government environments, because, as we've seen over the past 30 years or 28 years, that invariably leads, almost every single time, to ripple effects, cascade effects, domino effects in our economy. So I think that I speak for the majority of Suidlanders when I say that, much as we may be so disgusted and so revolted by the new South Africa Rainbow Nation, that we look eagerly forward to a cataclysm that changes that, or that precipitates change. What we don't want is great misery and difficulty and trauma in our economic circumstances between now and then. Right, what's next? We need to get cracking here. Where's my list? Simon. Oh, there we go. It's actually right in front of me. British oil and gas multinational BP will no longer support airport refueling in South Africa. We needn't go into the details. Let it suffice to say that it is, in a politically correct way, you know, they've couched it in all of the right terms, a reflection of the demise of the Airports Company of South Africa and of South African Airways and of Comair, which is being wrapped up, as you know, and so on and so forth. I think we've already spoken about the fact that Coburg is now 45 days. That is to say, the refurbishment of Coburg Unit 1 and Unit 2, they're busy with Unit 1, Unit 2 will follow, for the purposes of extending Coburg's lifespan to, I believe, the year 2050. Point of this article is they're already, only started in January or February, 45 days behind. I mean, it's just too much for your mind. And so presumably, in mathematical terms, there's prep work that wasn't completed last year. And that's how they're able to be, 45 days out of 40 behind, or whatever it is. Hey, they're in a class of their own, I'm telling you. We've seen enormous protests across the length and the breadth of France against a law that was brought in under emergency powers by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, circumventing the parliament. The law increasing the retirement age from 62 to 64 or 65. Again, I'm not going to open it up and go into all of the fine detail. We simply don't have the time today. We've got so much to talk about. Dr. Judy Mikovits, many of you will recall the videos that she made, or that were made featuring her very, very early on in the COVID pandemic. Right in the initial stages of the scamdemic, she came out and said, look, I've been involved in this work for a long time. It comes out of a laboratory. This laboratory in this place, featuring these people for that reason, with that funding at this person's behest, and so on and so forth. She's now been interviewed, not for the first time, by the way. We didn't cover it previously, but sometimes it's good to be cautious about this stuff. And revealed, when I say not for the first time, she's also not the first person, in a very cogent, that means persuasive manner. If I tell you a story and I say, oh, you must buy a Ford Granada, Ford Granada, Ford Granada, Ford Granada, it's the best, I'm telling you, it's the thing, don't buy a Toyota, don't buy a Mazda, that's one thing. But if I say to you, last year, Ford Granada won the Car of the Year title in South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, USA, England, Canada, and France. And it's got a 6-speed gearbox, and it's only one of, 7. And it's got special wishbone suspension that nobody else has got. And this and that. That is a cogent argument. So she has not made strong claims, she has made substantiated, justified, explicated, well explained assertions that HIV also came out of a laboratory. It was a scientific experiment, and it was disseminated into the populace. And it was disseminated into those two populaces that the scientists believed would prove their experiment best and most readily. Namely, gays, because they are promiscuous, this being the argument, and blacks, primarily in South Africa, because of a cultural prevalence of licentiousness. Now, whatever you may think, I think that that's abhorrent. If a young boy is raped at the age of 8 and he becomes a gay, and you judge him, that judgment will surely sit on your head, as true as God lives. So I don't clap handies when I hear stories like this. I personally, I don't want to get into details, one of the very biggest opportunities that Suidlanders has had in recent years was ultimately wrecked because nobody else was involved. It was only me representing Suidlanders, dealing with journalists, whatever. I simply refused to accept the homosexual aspect or whatever. So it's not about being sympathetic to this stuff. I cost Suidlanders a fantastic opportunity because I was aggressively opposed to the involvement of people who would be practicing immoral acts in our vicinity, or in our, whatever the right word is. It's not about being pro that. It's about understanding that when you inject people with AIDS and you think it's funny, you may be injecting people who have been through greater pain than any other 10 people that you know put together to have arrived in the place that they're in now. So I do not really, you must take me at my word. I think that this is absolutely horrific. And sadly, her argument is very, very powerful. Oh dear me. The ANC is out to woo white voters. Here's an anecdote for you. About 3 years ago, somebody tricked me into holding a meeting with a national intelligence, state security agency type chappie, deceived me, and during the course of that meeting, that person endeavored to persuade me to use my platform, influence, voice, whatever, nothing exceptional, standard stuff, to persuade whites to support the African National Congress in the interests of stability in this country, which is a very good argument on one level. I've made the argument for stability in the past 15 minutes. However, there's a difference between hoping, believing, and praying that things will turn out in a way that is best, that wicked things will turn out in a way that is best, and participating in that wickedness. They are as far from one another, much as they may seem similar and familial to one another. They are, in fact, as far from one another as the East is from the West. So I got quite worked up, and let's leave it there. Yeah, so this is their new tactic, absolute nonsense. In one of the biggest moves, now we get into the meaty stuff. We learned on Monday that Russia was to station, or is to station, or is stationing tactical nuclear missiles in its neighboring state of Belarus, which is very much a sister state to Russia. Belarus means white Russia. They are cousins or siblings of thousands of years. It's a big move for Russia to do that in Belarus, overlooking, as it were, Ukraine, overlooking Poland, is a terrific thing. This is something that you might find interesting. I'll be brief. A comedian called Jimmy Dore has a very nice channel on YouTube in which he makes fun, in a sort of jaded, facetious way, of serious political events. And it works quite well. He's got a good recipe. And he and Jeffrey Sachs, a guy that I'm sure that you've seen him, who's been speaking extensively about events in Ukraine and Nord Stream 1 and so on and so forth. On the same day, they published videos. And I said to people on various channels, these videos are worth watching, but don't make the mistake of believing every single word. And I'm going to tell you a brief parable that I used then that is not relevant to anything that we're discussing today, but which might be striking to you. When 9/11 occurred on the 11th of September 2001, a woman spotted a group of men standing on top of a van, like the A-Team, one of those vans. And lo and behold, the plane struck the tower and they began to celebrate. They were jubilant. They were hugging one another, high-fiving, handshaking. She said it was just absolutely unbelievable. Lo and behold, she got hold of the police, the FBI, blah, blah, blah. To cut a long story short, these guys were arrested. And I'm going to keep this very brief. You can look this up for yourselves. After a tremendous process of ducking and diving and dodging and not going to court and not being arraigned and being let off the hook and inexplicable returning home, these guys admitted on television in Israel, if you look on the right channel, I don't think you'll find it on YouTube, but should probably, you can see the original on television, that they were Mossad agents who were sent to New York to monitor these events, meaning that the state of Israel knew in advance that the events would take place, meaning that they were either the architects of the events or that they'd received privileged information somehow of the events, and between them and the CIA and the US government and whoever you like, they elected not to inform the public of the USA. So my point is, be careful about believing the first explanation that you get. Yeah, we discovered from Johan, what is his name? Johan Marais of the SA Snakebite Institute, that there is no antivenom whatsoever in South Africa. Antivenom for snakes. There are two types. The one is called a polyvalent, and the other one is called a monovalent, I think. And the monovalent is used only for boomslang bites, and the polyvalent antivenom is used for about another 8 venomous snakes. Black mamba, green mamba, puff adder, maybe a night adder or gaboon viper, I forget, and a couple of the cobras. Now, that's not to say that no vet and no doctor and no clinic and no hospital in South Africa ever ferreted away and kept for themselves some extra antivenom in recent years. It's to say that the institute, the laboratory institute that produces it, the state-owned institute, doesn't have any available. And in fact, for vets, for veterinarians, it has not had any available for over a year. Now also for human beings, hospitals, doctors, anybody who wants to order, there is none available. The failure of the new South Africa Rainbow Nation, all of you beloved yes voters. We've seen groot marakas in Israel. Who knows which way it's going to go? Many people are preaching doom and gloom. I'm not so sure that it's all that severe. I think it is kind of an Israeli hysteria phenomenon. I spent some time in Israel many years ago, and I know a number of Israelis, and they would be the first to admit that in certain regards, they have a tendency towards hysteria and neurosis and histrionics and so on. I'm not saying that their matters are not serious. I am saying that the hundreds of thousands of Israelis that have come out on the streets, and the reports that this is just moments away from civil war, may be a storm in a teacup, may be a little bit overdone, and therefore not cause for immediate panic on behalf of you and me, who may be, I don't know, planning a pilgrimage to Jerusalem or whatever the case. We've seen more train derailments. It's absolutely phenomenal. In the USA, these trains are going off the tracks left, right, and center. And the allegation that was posited by Donald Trump Jr., that these are Soviet sabotages, is gaining more ground and more currency and more credibility. Because it does seem astonishing. It does seem improbable that this is accidental coincidence. And it does seem more likely that it's contrived coincidence. And according to Donald Trump Jr., these are acts of spite and retaliation by Russia for various things that the USA has done, blown up the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, prevented the Germans from ratifying Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was a very, very big thing, blown up the, not Serb Stream, Siberian Stream, forget the correct name, pipeline, attempted sabotage of the Turk Stream pipeline, so on and so forth. That this is Russian retaliation using means and methods that were put in place in the Cold War 60, 50, 40, 35 years ago in anticipation of a conflict between the countries. The Russians claimed that they have a secret weapon that can destroy the USA, and nobody has any idea what they're talking about. We also learned on Tuesday that Wagner, which is the private military company, PMC, mercenaries to you and me, you know what I mean, is recruiting another 400,000 men. The Russians, between the PMC, which is really a lapdog of the state, it's not in any wise fully independent, are building a phenomenal force. And it seems improbable that they're doing it for nothing. This, of course, comes hot on the heels of the big recruitment that we saw roughly 8 months ago of another 300,000 Russian soldiers. It came out in some leaks that the 300,000 was a red herring. In fact, the number was allegedly, supposedly, according to some, 1.2 million. So it is arguable, at the risk of exaggerating, that Russia has either deployed existing troops or mobilized or is recruiting to mobilize and deploy as many as something like 3 million troops over the past roughly, let's call it 15 months. In the period shortly before the beginnings of the war in Ukraine, on Thursday the 24th of February last year, and now late March of the next year, 2023. Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, I mean, she's had every financial job in the USA, has been warning China and Russia about daring to adopt an alternative to the dollar. It was less than a year ago that Suidlanders was in the vanguard of those who suddenly and animatedly pointing out that various Russian and Chinese initiatives, such as their new credit card system, not just a card but a system to compete with the Visa system and the MasterCard system, a new SWIFT, in other words, a new cross-border payments system, oil for one, and so on, that these initiatives could spell great change in global finance. Nobody else, except perhaps Gerald Celente, Peter Schiff, and Robert Kiyosaki, would say a word about it for months. We were really in the vanguard. Even when Saudi Arabia and Iran entered those non-dollar conversations later on last year, we were yelling and performing about the significance of those new Saudi, Irani, Chinese, Russian conversation. We were performing like hysterics against a backdrop of silence. Now all of a sudden it's on Fox News and the US government is talking about it openly. To the extent that Janet Yellen has also been flying around the world. She was in South Africa 6 weeks ago, imploring governments not to side with Russia and China in this initiative because it is going to undermine the US dollar like nothing else ever has. On Tuesday, a boffin came out and told us that we may get stage 11 load shedding in South Africa in the winter time, which would be 16.5 hours a day. Even stage 9 would be 13.5 hours a day. It's very serious, ladies and gentlemen, but we have covered it elsewhere. Ah, this is going to go back a bit, but it'll come to a conclusion now and again in this video. On the 17th of March, the International Criminal Court issued a highly provocative arrest warrant of Vladimir Putin, only the third head of state ever, for child trafficking at the behest of the US State Department. On the 20th of March, Xi Jinping visited Putin and declared unlimited support, China's unlimited support for Russia. Bear that in mind for the rest of this video. On the 23rd of March, British depleted uranium shells were photographed in Ukraine. Some claim they were duds, but official, proper, actual duds. In other words, they're made by the same manufacturer, distributed by the British Ministry of Defence for the purposes of training, for the real thing. So, either which way, very serious. 25th of March, Russia deploys tactical nuclear missiles to Belarus, as I just told you a few minutes ago. And on the 29th of March, Russia began huge and unprecedented strategic nuclear missile exercises involving over 3,000 troops with the RS-24 YARS, strategic nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile with a range of 23,000 kilometers. And we asked the question, what next? We Suidlanders said, what next? Keep that in mind for a minute's time. The Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, which is a United States government agency facility, if that's the right word, shows that there has been a 4,070% increase in miscarriages and stillbirths since the mRNA rollout. I have been warning about this. I stuck my neck out a country mile since, I believe, August of 2020, when it became apparent that there was a critical mass of empirical evidence that the vaccines that would be rolled out in November, December, January, and February of 2020 and early 21 were pernicious, that they were bad, that they contained bad things, and that the pre-release studies of them done internally at Pfizer, Moderna, Janssen, that is to say Johnson & Johnson, and what's the other man? Anyway, it showed that these things, particularly the Pfizer one, were lethal. Our children are being slaughtered in the womb by people who knew. Therefore, it is deliberate. And we are doing nothing. Nordic countries to merge and create super air fleet. Very big thing, because as you know, the Russians have been perturbed about this idea of their neighbors, or those countries very close to their borders, ganging up against them, as we saw in the Nord Stream 1 and 2 sabotages, and many other events over the past year. So that is causing a lot of tension in the world. The Reserve Bank has raised the interest rate to a 13-year high. It's a big thing. We're going to skip over it. There'll be lots more opportunity to talk about it because it's going to affect all of us. So it's going to be a hot topic between us for months to come. We'll have other opportunities to make videos, and they won't. The timing won't be irrelevant. The president of Kenya told his citizens to dump the US currency because it's crashing. The Chinese army is ready to fight alongside Russia. This was kind of the answer to that question that I asked you to bear in mind. What next? What next? They're deploying tactical nuclear missiles, strategic nuclear missile exercises, Xi Jinping saying unqualified support, the Americans trying to bully backwards and forwards. The next thing you know, the Chinese come out and say not only unlimited support, but they begin to speak at military events, huge military events, saying be ready to march. Be ready to march with Russia. Riyadh, that is to say, Saudi Arabia, joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, strengthening ties with Beijing. Now remember, Beijing and the USA are at odds with one another. And the petrodollar system, whereby everybody in the world has to pay in dollars if they want to buy oil from Saudi Arabia or anybody else, is based upon an agreement between the USA and Saudi Arabia. So they're meant to be the best of all buddies. It would have been unthinkable 18 months ago that Saudi Arabia could enter the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, thereby betraying its supposed best petrodollar buddy, the USA. It's a huge thing, guys. The wall is being dismantled brick by brick, and not slowly either. There have been delays at several South African airports because air traffic navigation procedures, the procedures for the planes coming in and the controller saying maintain speed, runway 4, easy, you know, that apparently some of those procedures have been suspended because there's nothing underpinning them. In other words, the ILS, the landing system for bad weather, is not working at some South African airports. So the South African Civil Aviation Administration has done inspections at these airports and said, hey, you guys can't be using these procedures that depend upon these machines, these instruments, these what have you. How can you be doing bad weather landing procedures when you don't have the material that underpins it? You're just winging it. It's severe, guys. It's really bad. It's very, very, very bad. Basically, what has happened is that the deployed cadres of the African National Congress in the Airports Company South Africa, and in the, I think it's called the ATNS, but I'm taking a bit of a chance there, Air Traffic Navigation System, I don't know, have decided that they're just going to have the planes coming in and out. Whether the stuff's working, that isn't working. 10-4, 10-4. Cleared for landing. Woo! Mensa. It's too much for your mind. Brazil and China sign a pact to abandon the dollar. It is coming thick and fast now. The most breathtaking part of this thing, Brazil and China have said, well, we're going to do trade here. We're not going to go through the dollar. Is something that people don't understand. The petrodollar is the petrodollar, right? That's an underhanded, devious, deceitful agreement that has led to the whole world having to buy oil in dollars. That's the petrodollar. Then we have the world reserve currency, or the currency of last resort, which is the fact that the dollar is supposed to be the only currency based upon gold, and all other currencies are pinned to it. This is from the Bretton Woods Agreement, the 44 allied nations, of which 43 agreed between the 2nd and 22nd of June at the Mount Washington Hotel in the town of Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, United States of America, 1944. Also, as crooked as a shepherd's staff. But there's another thing that many people don't understand, and that's that when I buy a pair of tackies from China, what are these things called? Blue Gumtree or whatever, I don't know these things. Alibaba. I think I'm paying 10 Rand for 100 Chinese yuan. But that's the deal today. That's the exchange rate. It's not. I'm paying 10 Rand for $1 or dollars to mediate between my rands and the Chinese yuan. So every single transaction, trade transaction in the world, in the back, you don't realize it, but in the back, in the system, in the you know what I'm trying to say, deep in the background, is in fact being mediated by the US dollar, which gives it a far more cachet, far more prestige, far higher regard than it would otherwise have. These guys are now saying, we don't need to, compare ourselves to the dollar every time. We'll figure out some maths algorithms, very, very difficult mathematical algorithms, but we'll just give you 10 yuan, you give me 20 Brazilian real, off we go. So, this is huge. Two of the biggest economies in the world saying, thanks, but no thanks. We don't need no dollars for us to trade. It is an assault upon the US dollar, the likes of which history has never seen. And it shall do untold harm, which in turn shall harm all of the other currencies that are pegged to the dollar pursuant to the Bretton Woods Agreement that I described to you. So all of us may take a pounding because of that. Lo and behold, some hours later, it was late last night, 10 minutes later, we received on our RSI feeds that China had just completed its first liquid natural gas trade in yuan, or yuan as it's spelled, yuan as it's pronounced. Renminbi being the proper noun, one being the common noun. So the equivalent would be renminbi equals rand, one equals monies. Like a kid saying, Mommy, I've got so many monies. Look, the monies Granny gave me. 10 1-cent pieces. So money as opposed to rand. One as opposed to renminbi. So another enormous assault upon the US dollar, the third or fourth one in as many days if you include the Saudi story. Another train yesterday, Minnesota town evacuated after train carrying ethanol derails, bursts into flames. The second one in 2 days. Austrian parliamentarians walked out on a speech by Volodymyr Zelensky. We're already at 43 minutes, guys, and I know I never get it right, but I hope to be able to refine these weeks in review down to under 20 minutes. So really, this is a little bit of a disaster. I'm not going to go into it. You can look it up. But here's something else that is very big. Finland is now a member, or shall now become, that the last obstacle has been removed, a member of NATO. An enormous provocation of Russia. Australian banks cancelling all cash. Nearly a third of freight rail volumes have been lost in 5 years. The first two small railways in South Africa were built in 1859 and 1860 in Cape Town and Durban, respectively. So, almost 1/3 of what it took 158 years to build in volumes carried by South African railways. has been destroyed in 5 years. This is the new South Africa, Rainbow Nation. And I tell you, it is irremediable. Do not endeavor to rectify it. Do not endeavor to remedy it. You and I must find other modes in which to succeed that don't depend upon pandering the new South Africa, because it will never work. We will be sucked dry and spat out before we could ever dream of the other party improving, being remedied, being redeemed, redeeming itself. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Suidlanders, the week in review for the 31st of March 2023. A week that I believe will be remembered in history for the enormous events that have taken place to undermine the US dollar and to increase, to nudge forward the war in Ukraine to some sort of nuclear, or at least very much multi-party conflict, including millions of Chinese and others now preparing to support Russia. Thank you for watching this video. Goodbye, and God bless all of you. From my heart I say it. For the dark times that lie ahead of us. And may He inspire you through His Son, the Word, through which all things were made. May He inspire you through the Lamb to prepare well for that which is coming. Amen. Bye-bye.